Hey, what's up guys? Paul here, aka P-LASK, and today we're going to be going over how to make lo-fi house music in the style of artists like DJ Boring, Mallgrab, Ross from Friends, DJ Seinfeld. So think of that house music that's got that beat up old tape deck kind of sound to it, right? So I'm going to break down this track. This is part of a much longer tutorial over at sonicacademy.com. But today what we're going to do is just do a quick breakdown of the track. We'll start with the drums and we'll go through the various different synth elements I used, how I came up with the different synth parts, and some of the plugins and Max for Live devices I'm using to create that lo-fi gritty kind of sound. And I think that even if you don't make house music, but you want to inject some lo-fi into whatever genre it is that you do produce, whether it's hip hop or pop or ambient music, I think you'll find something useful in this course. So stick around for this breakdown of the track, and if you want more, you can go to sonicacademy.com to get a lot more detail and a full breakdown of every element of the track. But let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we will just run straight top to bottom through all the different tracks here. I'll show you what I'm using, the different tools, and some of the different plugins and effects we've applied to different buses and things like that. Starting off with the drums. Now, all the drum samples are included in the download for this course on Sonic Academy, but all the drums are just various drums I've accumulated from my own personal collection of samples that I've processed in different ways, and I thought they were all fitting to the style. So I've included them there. We've done a little bit of further processing of them, but starting with the kick here. And all of these, you can see they're all in individual drum racks. They all started off in one main drum rack where we put the main beat together, and then I extracted the various chains out so that we could go through and arrange them a little bit more easily. But anyway, we've got the kick here. Let me solo the drums group for a second here. We've got our kick. Just a little bit of EQ on it to clean it up. All these drums are going to have some EQ. We go over that in the mix down section in the tutorial. Claps, we got two different claps that we're working with here, kind of alternating back and forth between. I'll just kind of add the elements one at a time here. So here's our kick and our claps. Then these main hats, where I've got a closed hat and an open hat, and those are going to alternate, play some different patterns. I've got those both assigned to the same choke group within the drum rack, so they cut each other off. When we skip ahead here, we'll hear a little bit of the interplay between the two different hi-hats. Got a separate shaker sample here. Just add a little shuffle to the overall groove of everything. A secondary open hi-hat. Let me jump ahead to this point here in the arrangement, just to change the tone of the hi-hat up a little bit and change the feel of it through different parts of the arrangement. You can see that that's panned to the right, and then we've also got a tambourine that's going to sort of accompany that on the left. And then altogether the drums are passing through this group channel where we've done some additional processing here, some just overall EQ for the whole drum mix. I'm using the drum bus audio effect, which I think is fantastic for gritting up your drums and just making the whole mix sound a little bit more lo-fi, using various distortions built into it. We're also using some multiband dynamics here to just apply some gentle multiband compression over the whole drum mix. A limiter just to catch any peaks, and then finally I'm using this plugin from Tel called Tel DAC, or Digital Audio Conversion, which is emulating, essentially recording a sample onto a digital recorder and then playing it back, and you can do things like reduce the sample rate and the bit depth. You can even emulate different vintage samplers here. So just to give the whole drum mix this feel like it's playing off an old sampler, essentially. Then our bass, let's jump down here to the bass. Using Anna 2 for this, and this is a patch that we synthesize in the course. I'm using an Oberheim square wave here to give it a nice analog tone. Let's skip ahead to where the bass line comes in full here. Give it a nice analog tone, and then we're using this 4-pole vintage low-pass filter along with some filter modulation from the envelope, and then also utilizing the bit crusher effect to reduce the sample rate and the bit depth just a little bit, to lo-fi-ify our bass sound a little bit more. Let's hear that with the drums. And then we've got this organ, which is kind of acting like the lead for the track. And we're using operator for this. I'm using the chord MIDI effect to generate an inverted minor 9 chord. I'll go more detail into that in the tutorial on Sonic Academy. We've also synthesized this organ patch using operator. Here we're using the additive engine and operator to create a custom oscillator and give us a nice kind of tone wheel organ sound. We're applying some processing here from the fantastic free Tal Chorus plugin, which emulates the Roland Juno series of synths, the built-in chorus effect that you can find on those. This is adding a little stereo width and movement to the sound. And then this auto pan is acting almost like an emulation of a Leslie rotary speaker, where we've got this subtle tremolo effect, this kind of left-right panning effect. Let's hear all those elements together. It's kind of like the main body of the track, these elements here, the backbone, the drums, the bass, and then this organ lead kind of sound. Also added in this pad sound, which we're just kind of using to create a one-shot stab to add some texture at the beginning of certain downbeats, and just add some, just some ambience to the background of the track. Again, using the MIDI chord effect for that, generating a minor 9 chord. This is a patch that I've synthesized from scratch in Wavetable, and I'm alternating this patch using macro controls here and using these macro variations. And this allows us to change the timbre of the sound between different sections of the song, as you'll hear. So in the main chorus section, you heard what that sounds like, but in the breakdown, we've completely modified the sound to sustain and be a little bit more filtered out, so it just adds some ambience over everything as the drums are playing, and we get these high strings that I'll get to in a second. Let's jump down here to the synth stab. This is an extra kind of one-shot synth chord stab that we're using in the choruses here. Let's jump ahead to the chorus. And this is a patch from the Arturia CZV, which is an emulation of the Casio CZ1 phase distortion synth. We've taken a preset here and modified it, custom fitted to our track here. And again, we're using the MIDI chord effect to generate that minor 9 chord. So we get this kind of alternating call response between the pad and the synth stab in the choruses. Just filling out the background again, creating some texture. Then I'm using a sustained string sound to add tension to certain portions of the arrangement. This string patch is coming from the Korg M1 plugin. Korg M1, a very famous Korg workstation keyboard synth, came out in the late 80s, and it's used all over different records from throughout the late 80s and all through the 90s, even up to today. But we're using a strings patch from that again, I've modified it. We've done some LFO modulation of the pitch. And we're also adding some processing to that there. Here's the strings going to come in again here. We're using the Ableton chorus ensemble effect to add some width and warmth to the string sound. I'm also using the very fantastic D16 Decimort plugin to reduce the sample rate and bit depth again here, kind of fitting into our whole lo-fi motif. And then some pretty heavy EQ just to tuck it into the mix. Now this string patch, you can see it's part of an instrument rack here, and it's layered with a sampler in which I'm using some vinyl noise that I've recorded. And the vinyl noise is there to add just a little bit more texture, essentially just to make the string sound like it's sampled off of vinyl. So we're using the looping feature inside of Sampler, as well as some LFO modulation to randomize the looping, so that this sounds like just a long, seamless stretch of vinyl noise, not the same, 4-second long sample looping over and over again. It's going to sound a little bit more seamless as we play it continuously with the strings as they're sustaining through the choruses and the break, and just like I said, those different sections in the arrangement to add tension. The vocals, these come from a free sample pack called Jungle 1989 to 1999, and these vocals are actually sampled from an early 90s rave track called The Bouncer by Kicks Like a Mule. And one of the motifs that you hear in lo-fi house from artists like Ross from Friends and DJ Boring is a lot of times they might sample older records. Ross from Friends in particular, if you've heard his songs, either Bootman or Talk to Me You'll Understand, uses primarily samples from old records that he degrades quite a bit and then adds beats over. So I wanted to kind of give a little shout out to that, just a little homage, if you will, to that sampling technique. And we've done some processing here where we're reducing the bit depth and sample rate again, but here we're using Ableton's Redux effect. We're using utility to make it mono because the sample was a bit stereo and there's a little bit of offset balance on the left side. Limiter just to catch any peaks, and also just boost the gain up a little bit, just kind of even the signal out and boost the gain a little bit. then EQ to fit it into the mix. We've got this crash cymbal that I'm using for transitions into different phrases of the song here. This is just the 909 crash sample from the Ableton core library that I'm using here within Simpler. And then I'm processing that in a parallel effect rack through the Convolution Reverb Pro Max for Live device. Give it some more texture and let it ring out for a little bit longer. And we're also EQing that as well. I'm going to skip this FX bus for a minute. We're going to come back to that. But down here we have 3 different sends or return tracks that we're using on a few of the different elements in the track. Let me expand all these tracks just so we can see where we're using them. So you can see, for example, the pad and the synth stab. These are both being sent through this hall reverb. So I got 2 different flavors of reverb, a shorter room reverb and a longer hall reverb on return tracks A and B. Both of these are utilizing the Max for Live Convolution Reverb Pro. If you have Ableton Live 11 Suite, you'll have access to this. You can download it for free. And if not, you can use any reverb, of course, but I just wanted to experiment with the flavors of these different impulse responses here. And then we're using the Ableton Echo effect on return track C to add in a delay, and we're going to be utilizing that. You can see that I have send C here on the crash cymbal, for example. I have that automated. We're using that in a few different elements of the track to kind of ease the transitions and make the transition sound a little bit more energetic. So again, that's something we'll go over in more detail in the full course. And then another thing, this is probably one of the most important things in the track, is this FX bus track. And if I stop playback for a second, you might have noticed this, but we're getting this just tape noise that's playing constantly over the whole mix, a common thing in a lot of lo-fi music. And the way I'm generating this is through this fantastic free Max for Live device called Crap Cassette, which you can download from maxforlive.com. And it's just adding this background tape noise, but it also, as we run the entire mix through it, I'm actually busing all the different tracks into this, including the return tracks. But as we run the entire mix through it, it applies a little bit of tape saturation and compression over the whole mix as well. And it does some additional things like adds a little bit of like tape modulation. We have these wow and flutter controls to kind of modulate the pitch very slightly, the volume very slightly. We even have this tape age control, which can degrade the quality even more if you want to. So I'll walk through how I set that up in the full course. I'm also using macro variations over here to essentially turn the tape noise on and off. You can see I just toggled it off there. This is just so that when we're working and building the track, we don't have to have the tape noise playing in the background constantly, but when we want to hear the whole mix and when we want to export the track, we can leave that on to give the entire lo-fi track this sort of emulation of it playing off an old tape player. Lastly, down here on the master track, I'm using a utility. We were using that in the mix down just to sort of keep some headroom, at least 6 dB of headroom here. And then I've got a mastering chain, which I'll go through in much greater detail in the tutorial, but just to run you through quickly. I'm using a couple of glue compressors just to keep peaks and things like that under control. Using a bit of parallel compression from Ableton's compression to boost the volume of some of the quieter parts of the mix. A bit of mid-side EQ here, just to kind of clean up the low end on the sides channel and do a little boosting and cutting of the highs in the mid and the sides channel. And then lastly, we're using this Isotope Ozone 9 to finalize the master here. I'm making use of the EQ, the imager, and the maximizer to add loudness. But we will go through that, as I said, in much more detail if you decide to check out the full course over at sonicacademy.com. But that's going to do it for this breakdown video. Hope that's been helpful and you've learned a little something along the way. As always, I will catch you guys soon on another Sonic Academy tutorial. Take care.
Thanks everyone for watching. We really appreciate the support from you guys. If you liked this video, then smash that like button. And if you want to be notified about new content, hit the subscribe and the bell notifications. Peace!